develop self-attunement. What we missed out on in childhood, many of us, again, because of our culture, is this attunement, this deeper connection with our parents, where our parents had the capacity to see us, to feel us, to understand our needs without us having to say anything, because it was not our responsibility to say anything as children. Now, as adults, our invitation is to develop this self-attunement. This means getting to know ourselves on a deeper level, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and physiologically, our body. What a beautiful human being you are. Think about it this way. You're such a beautiful human being. How wonderful would it be for someone to know you that deeply? And how wonderful would that be if that someone is you?
Oh,
first
Effie,
of all,
that feels like a huge exhale. Hello and welcome to the Liberated Woman Podcast, where my guests and I empower ambitious, mission-driven women like you to break free from toxic productivity and embrace a joyful, satisfying life. I'm your host, Tamu Thomas, author of Women Who Work Too Much, leadership coach, and keynote speaker. In each episode, we explore personal and professional growth, featuring insightful conversations with inspiring guests, as well as episodes where I explore topics and answer your questions to support your growth and transformation. If you enjoy the show, please do like, subscribe, comment, rate, review, and share. The more listeners I reach, the more impactful guests I can attract to support your journey. Okay, let's begin. Hello, wonderful people. Welcome back to another episode of the Liberated Woman Podcast. And today I am joined by Effie Kli, who is a trauma specialist. She does a lot of work in the somatic trauma healing space. And I was introduced to Effie by my friend Ruthie. And as soon as I clicked on her Instagram profile, I knew, Effie, that you were somebody I would love to have on my podcast. I love the work you do. And the way I summarize it is that your work helps to awaken people from the spell of trauma so they can start to live with vitality rather than being beholden to living a life they tolerate and cope with because of the story of trauma. And when I read your content, when I had a look at your website, and my daughter is my researcher, when she went off doing her research, I was like, goodness me, this is about giving people a roadmap of hope based on reality. So I'm going a bit off piste, but my background is social work. I trained as a somatic coach, and my observation is that there is a narrative around being healed that falsely leads people to believe they need to resolve all this stuff before they can start to live vibrantly. And what I see so clearly from your work is that we can live vibrantly with all of this stuff. We need to learn how to be with it, which for me is like, mwah, delicious. So before I go any further, for people that haven't had the honor of being in contact with your work and who you are, please could you tell us who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Wow, thank you for the beautiful introduction. I think you've introduced myself so well, so I only going to fill in some gaps now. I appreciate you having me and inviting me in your space. I will start from talking a little bit about my background, my history, because I think this has been pivotal when it comes to choosing my path, my purpose, because what I do is not just work for me. It's my purpose. It's my life's dharma. And I decided to go down that path, or somehow this path has chosen me because of my history and my own experience with trauma and generational trauma, and my own experience being raised by people who lived in trauma, experienced mental health challenges, but they were not aware of. I come from Greece originally. That's why you might be able to hear my accent. But I've been in London for 12 years, and London is my home now. I was raised by Greek parents in a very beautiful place, sunny, coastal. And for quite a few years, I believed that my life was great. As a child, the first 10 years of my life, I believed that, oh my God, like, this is perfect. I felt so safe and I was so close to my mother. And it seemed that we experienced an abundance of resources, and it didn't seem that there were any real family problems that I was aware of. But looking back now, I just see that in some way I was in the naivety of childhood, because when I was 10 years old, my mother took her own life. So, of course, at that time, for me, this was a shock, and my life changed completely in so many ways. We had to move location, house. I was before closer to my mother's side of the family. Then I became closer to my father's side of the family. So many things changed. I had to change schools as well. Financial problems started coming up. So everything that was a constant for me throughout the first 10 years of my life turned upside down after. What I did as a child at the time, because I didn't have the emotional support I needed, I mean, I had my physical needs covered, but my family did not have the capacity to respond to my emotional needs or to cater for my grief. As a result, as a coping strategy, I had to develop a protective shell around me to not feel the pain, the grief, the sadness, the loneliness. For some time, this worked well. I started being a teenager and also a younger woman later on. I became a high achiever at school, university, workplaces. And I believe that what happened back then did not affect me. I genuinely did not believe that. And I remember I was able to some very close friends of mine to confide my family story. And I remember I wasn't feeling anything. I was so detached from it that I was able to share what happened and be like, but you see, I'm good. And I remember this was in my early 20s. Yet at the same time, I wasn't realizing at the time, I was living with very high anxiety. And also I had this very strong fight energy. So I was very irritable, very frustrated, getting angry quickly. But still, I felt that this was part of my personality, which is very interesting as well. I thought, This is who I am as a person. I'm just a stressed woman, angry woman, and that's it. Then I came to London. I thought I believed that I had this wonderful life, good job in marketing, like good job by the book in marketing, and good money, social life, all these great things. And this is when I started having my panic attacks, one after the other. And I went to the doctor, to my GP, and I was prescribed medication, which helped for some time. But then once I came off it, anxiety and panic attacks came back. That was something that woke me up, because I thought, in the context of my life's history, I started realizing that my body's responses were normal. I had no idea about trauma. I had no idea about the nervous system, about somatics at the time. I think it was just an intuitive hit I received. Something inside me said, if you take a step back and look at your life, your body's responses are ordered responses, not disordered responses. Despite the fact that at the time I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and mild depressive disorder. No, this is not it. I'm not disorder. And then I started exploring other avenues, and I started reading books about trauma, developmental trauma, about somatics, about the nervous system. And long story short, my life changed significantly. My connection to myself changed significantly. I started processing emotions that obviously have been there for such a long time, but I had no awareness that they were there. And of course, when you are not aware of an emotion, you can't regulate it. And it comes out in ways that are completely unexpected. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that we're not even talking about this as much. People don't know this. I didn't know this. At the time, even the idea, the word of trauma was not as widespread as it is now. And that's when I started training in trauma, training in somatics, in the nervous system. And this led me to what I do today, where I work privately with people and in group settings. And it's what I deeply love. And I feel so privileged to be able to do this work.
So much there. Thank you for sharing so candidly, because what you have shared is, huge. It's not insignificant by any means. And there's a couple of places I'd like to go. So, first of all, where I'd like to go is that you talked about the emotional needs that were unmet and your experience of losing your mother to suicide. And I'd like to acknowledge that and thank you for sharing that with us. And, sorry for your loss. Sorry for your loss. I've been not picked up, but social media has picked me up for that, where people who are experts in grief say, like, grief, not Greece, grief, like, say the thing, I am sorry that you lost your mother in such a palpable, dramatic, sudden way. So there's that.
Thank you.
And then there are some people that may think, well, why am I making such a big deal? Or, well, that doesn't relate to me because I haven't experienced something like that. And a lot of my work looks at how systemic oppression, particularly capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy, impacts our ability to be who we are. And something I have observed is that there are a lot of people, and I will speak to women because that's the gender I work with, but there are lots of women who were experienced, and I'm going to say the word and we'll deal with it, okay? There are lots of women who have experienced emotional neglect, not because of anything willful, but because of the conditioning of patriarchy. Lots of women were undermothered because their mothers were so busy mothering their fathers because of the conditions of patriarchy. So the mother may have been a stay-at-home mum. The people I work with in general, their mothers were working. But the mother, did their best to be at the school plays, etc., but were not able to meet their children as they were because they didn't even have the space to, because they were parenting men. And that is something that is very, very common. And I'll say, in my book, the first sentence in the first paragraph is, it's not your fault. It's not your mum's fault either. It is part and parcel of patriarchal conditioning. So there are lots of us out here who are emotionally neglected, but we also live in a society that conditions us to squash and suppress and, repress ourselves and bypass with, I can be strong. It's okay because that could not have affected me. That cannot be a thing because I've got this career. I make all this money. I've got the husband. I've got the children, or I'm content being single, whatever the case may be, which become things that actually squash down rather than liberate those things that we have stuffed into. I say we put them into like the hinges of our body and the spaces, the creative spaces, like our pelvic area, knees, thighs, lower back, head, all of those sorts of things. But that's the statement. I would like to read a quote from Resmaa Menakem, which adds to what I've just shared and what you shared in introducing us to you. Resmaa Menakem is a trauma specialist, and his area of specialism is anti-racism, in short. And he has written a wonderful book called In My Grandmother's Hands, and other books as well, but that's the one that really stayed with me. And in that book, a quote is, "Trauma decontextualized in a family looks like family traits. Trauma in a people looks like culture." What say you, Effie, when you hear that and thinking about what you shared with us just now?
Wow. I would say that this speaks to me so deeply, including what you've shared before around emotional neglect and about what women go through as a result of patriarchal trauma, because this is exactly my mother's story, my grandmother's story. And now it's on me to break these patterns. And I'm telling you, it's not easy. So I'm not going to sugarcoat this. It's not easy, because the default is to go back to the familiar that you've witnessed in your mother, to what your grandmother had to do to survive. And in my case, and based on the quote that you shared just now, the family traits in the women of my family are women who are controlling, women who are over functioning, who are very reliable and dependable, but they have a hard time relying on someone else. And of course, this also leads them to choose men who are unreliable or are not, for some reason, they do not have the capacity to be consistent, to provide for the family, to be honest. And this was my grandma's history. This was my mother's history. I believe that my mother would be with us if at that point had found the strength to divorce my father. And this is not me blaming my father at this point. This is not me blaming my mother. But looking now, in hindsight, I have the privilege to be able to do that. My mother didn't have the privilege to do that. I think her choice of a husband played a huge role in developing depression. I think the reason she chose that husband is because she was undermothered, but also she was underfathered, because the dynamic was exactly the same between her mother and her father. So she basically copied and pasted her mother's choices, survival choices. These are survival choices. And now, in my case, I'm being called to change these family traits. And this is what I support my clients and my students to do in the way I can. with the contribution of my work to help them see that what they've been experiencing is not who they are, and
Yes.
even it's not who their mothers were, and it's not even who their fathers deep down were. This is all part of cultural, social trauma that we've been experiencing, and we confuse it as our authentic selves. We confuse it. We see limitations, and we see these limitations as default, that somehow we are born to live in those limitations. Somehow there's a higher power out there that hates us. This is something that people who have experienced trauma believe, that somehow I'm cursed. Somehow God is punishing me. Somehow there's something or someone who's against me to actually thrive. But this is not the case. These are the dynamics of complex and very nuanced trauma, that race is involved, gender is involved, the distribution of resources is involved, so many things, and it's not one layer. And that's why I think one of the reasons that stops people from healing is that their history is complex. The history is complex, and there's so much to unpack. And we are one body, one consciousness, finite amount of time and energy. And this can be a lot for an individual. And that's why we need support, and we need to each other to heal in community, in safe spaces, in compassionate spaces, because this is way too heavy for one person to deal with.
Oh my, excuse me. Oh my goodness. I relate to this as a human being in my own right. I relate to this as a coach. Our society and the addiction to independence, which is actually hyper independence, goes against what it is to be a human being. We are hardwired for connection. We cannot survive alone. However, the overt and covert messages we get from society is that you are an inadequate human if you require help. So there's the Peter Levine quote that I can't remember, but something along the lines of trauma isn't what happens to us, it's what happens to us in the absence of an empathetic witness, something along those lines. And I know that a huge chunk of what we experience in terms of the things that end up being traumatic for us and end up being challenges that prevent us from living in the full expression of ourselves will be healed or will be supported if we allow ourselves to be seen and held in a community that is worthy of seeing and holding us. So this is going to take me to a post of yours on Instagram that I've shared. That I've saved, and I'm going to share it here. So this is your post. And also, just a caveat, your work really speaks to me because I am somebody who has a very intimate relationship with anxiety. But because I was so good at suppressing and splitting myself and shutting down my felt sense with mindset, I didn't know that I experienced anxiety until I started having panic attacks. And even those panic attacks, despite me being a social worker at the time and working with people who were diagnosed with complex and anxiety disorder and would have panic attacks, because theirs looked and sounded so different to mine. I was high functioning. They were not functioning. So I could not relate the two until I had a panic attack that was so big, I thought I was going to die. I didn't know it was a panic attack, and I was contemplating calling an ambulance. Told myself not to be so silly, managed to get myself together, go to court, give evidence in court. I was a social worker at the time, having a contentious case. The anxiety and the panic wasn't necessarily due to the case because I was used to that. But all of the things I was ignoring combined, they were like, listen, lady, today, you're going to do something about it. And as I started to unpick and unravel this relationship with anxiety, I was taken back to being 7 years old or so, walking to school. So this was the 80s. That was a common phenomena, small children walking to school on their own, and remembering having a sense of dread. I just went back to that period of time and remembered I was always worried something bad was going to happen, and realized, oh, okay, so you have had this relationship with anxiety for a long time. So that's another reason why your work really speaks to me. So I am going to read a post of yours that really spoke to me, but I used my transcription. So some of the words are a bit off, but we will get the gist. Your anxiety might be a sign that the environment you're in is not the right one for you. When we're in an environment that feels unsafe, or for whatever reason have doubt, our perception, or for whatever reason, we sometimes doubt our perception and start looking for evidence that this is our fault. If we experience childhood trauma, this makes sense, because as children, we also had to reject a more accurate perception of our parents and family to maintain our attachment to them. When we find ourselves in incompatible situations as adults, we undermine how we feel and ignore evidence telling us that they're not good for us. We even start taking way more responsibility for changing the situation so that we don't have to leave, because leaving can feel scary and uncertain. When this happens, our familiar response is to stay and ignore our body's signals. The real medicine is in learning to tolerate the temporary discomfort of leaving instead of tolerating the certain misery of incompatibility. Sometimes the work is to stay, but sometimes the work is to leave. Could you speak a bit more to this juicy post?
Yes, yeah. Thank you for sharing this. And as I was listening to the words, my story was coming up, the things you've shared came up, client stories came up. This is a very common story. And I would say this is a very common story amongst women. And because of the nature of your podcast, and because I would say also most of my clients, the vast majority of my clients are women, although there are some brave men as well who choose to work with me, and I want to honor them too. And they're wonderful. I would say that there's an imbalance within us as women. Not it starts from us. It's a result of the cultural conditioning and social conditioning that's telling us that we are safer with unsafe men than being alone.
Oh, sorry. Let me just repeat that. We are safer. Societal conditioning creates an environment where we can believe it is safer to be with unsafe men than to be alone.
Yes, yes. This is my story. This is my mother's story. This is my grandmother's story. This is the story of so many women around me, family members, friends, students, clients. And when I say unsafe men, I want to be clear that I'm not simply talking about men who are violent or abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I think, a mistake we make here.
Mm-hmm.
An unsafe man is a man who is not reliable, who is not honest, who doesn't know himself, who has no purpose, who doesn't have the capacity to provide for his family, who is not emotionally available, who is not emotionally responsive to his wife, to his partner, to his children, who is addicted. And obviously all these are a result of trauma. Men are also, their psyche, their conditioning, their nervous system have been saved as a result of the cultural conditioning and the patriarchal trauma. They're also the output of this trauma. So we need to recognize this. The little boys that come out of their mother's womb are not born to be unsafe men. They become along the way. A conscious society would not raise men who would be unsafe. Now, if I'm raised by a father who is aloof, for example, in my case, and this is something we discover with my clients as we start deepening the work more and more, that they realize, actually, my father was present, but he was not really emotionally present. He was aloof. This can be shattering for a little girl. But because it's the absence of what's needed, that's the trauma, it's invisible.
Yes.
And it can be very, very confusing. This is a very confusing type of trauma, neglect. And that girl is raised feeling completely unseen by the masculine. But of course, in this unseen state, she doesn't feel safe. She doesn't feel protected. She doesn't feel loved. And then she starts learning that this lack of safety is the norm. And the body feels that. The body feels this lack of safety. The mind doesn't know how to interpret it. And then she goes on to live her life as an adult. She develops her own coping strategies. This will be different for every woman. A cluster of coping strategies to protect her. And of course, then she will be attracted to unsafe men. Unsafe, again, it can look like in many different ways, because this feels familiar to her body. Her body doesn't know what safety looks like in a relationship, in a relational context. So it won't look for it. She will find a man.
It might be repulsed by it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. She might be repulsed by it. She might find a consistent, reliable man boring.
Yep.
A man with no addiction, not exciting enough.
Yep.
A man who is fully faithful, committal to her. I don't know. He's a little bit dull. And this, again, it might not be even conscious thoughts, but it's what the body experiences. Because the body is looking for the high, the big high and the big low. So that's what happens. So in a way, we're conditioned to believe that safety is being surrounded by unsafe men. And as a result, it can be incredibly scary to leave these situations, these relationships, because the girl within us, the little girl within us is activated. And it's the girl within us that stops us from leaving, because for that girl, it's like leaving her father.
Ooh.
And that's the big wound. And imagine a little girl to leave her father. That's kind of impossible, right? So our invitation at that time, as now women, adult women, is to learn to hold the energy, the grief, the sadness, the fear, the terror of that girl, not just mentally, but somatically. And this is where we transform the trauma. When we do the thing that our mothers and grandmothers didn't have the privilege to do and the capacity to do, while learning also to hold the emotions that will come up, because some of the emotions is not just ours, it's also our mothers and grandmothers.
Absolutely.
That will come up because now we disrupt the pattern.
Yes.
And there will be a lot of trauma energy that will need to titrate through us little by little to be processed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we also need support from people around us to hold us,
Yes.
so that we feel resourced enough to be able to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh, there are so much in what you said. Like this is literally making my toes curl and my whole body is like diving right into the pool. For those of us that are visual people, I'm going to share a visual that will help speak to what Effie has just described for us really clearly and palpably. But sometimes our subconscious will find all kinds of ways for us to think we're confused and we don't get it. So if you imagine a relationship is like an iceberg, we know that we see the top of the iceberg above the surface of the water. But most of the time, the biggest bit of that iceberg is submerged below the water. Unsafe relationships can look like the top of the iceberg. Our partner is able to do the I love you, I love you, I love you. They're able to bring money in. They're available for, oh my goodness, this is so great. But they do not have the capacity and even subconsciously, willfully refuse to even look at the water, never mind go below the surface to see what's there. And this can look like when you try to have a conversation with your partner about something that is perhaps hurting your feelings, something you need to be different, a boundary you need to have in place. And it can look like a total dismissal. That's all in your head. That's not how it is. But the even more confusing one can be when the partner doesn't fully listen to you, just very quickly attempts to solve it. Okay, we're not spending enough quality time together. I booked us a restaurant. And that is a defense. It's a very slick defense mechanism, but it is a defense mechanism, which means that particular issue is solved, but the matter at heart remains unresolved. So as a woman, you can sit down and think, why am I still complaining? Because now we've got this beautiful restaurant booked. And you don't realize that underneath that, you're now feeling unsafe, even though on the surface, the matter has been solved because you haven't been heard, because you're not being seen, because you're being squashed, you're being repressed. And the unconscious message is, you're too much, you're too needy. What are you complaining about? So I share that iceberg descriptor so that we can understand that when those needs are being shut down and not met, it makes us feel unsafe because what we are being told is this relationship doesn't have enough space for all of you. This relationship only has enough space for the parts of you I find convenient. And this is when we're unclear about that and we're not able to articulate it. I find the women I work with end up in a relationship whereby they embody the mother archetype and the man embodies the tempestuous teenager who is all good when everything's going my way. But as soon as that person is challenged, they become the sulking, brooding teenager who can't understand why you're so mean. Why are you nagging? Why are you doing this to me? And that causes harm to both.
Exactly. And also want to say something that you've mentioned, and it's very important. And I want your listeners to reflect on this. When we are with a man who cannot speak his truth, a woman cannot be safe with him. So if a man says, okay, let's book a restaurant, let's go to a restaurant this Saturday because you're just complaining that we're not spending time together. If we don't understand why we're not spending enough quality time together, a woman is not going to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that Deb Dana talks about. Deb Dana is a wonderful
I
teacher.
refer to her as the Beyonce of the somatic world.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Yes, she's like that. She's a polyvagal theory teacher, and she works very closely with Dr. Stephen Porges, who is the founder of the polyvagal theory, the teacher and the researcher. She says that in order for us human beings to feel safe, we need context. As in what, why, how.
Mm-hmm.
That's why communications and relationships fall apart when communication is not present.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not enough me to be in a relationship with a man and say we're not spending quality time together or enough quality time together, and him to say, okay, then let's book to go to a new restaurant on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't give me any context around why I'm experiencing. And I need context from you because we are together in this. That's what relationship is.
Yes.
So if the only thing you do is try to solve it with a quick action, then you don't give me enough reassurance that you know what you're doing.
Or that you are understanding, that you're trying to understand me and us.
Exactly. I feel you don't know yourself. And because you don't know yourself, you have a limited capacity to know me, to understand me. And as a result, your capacity to cater for this relationship is also limited. I believe, looking back in my previous relationships, the problem again and again was communication. And I'm not saying that it was coming only from the other person, it was coming from me, because I never learned this. I never learned this to communicate. Mm-hmm. But this is so important. Context is so important. So a man who cannot speak his truth, we cannot be safe with. And sometimes our wounded girl, inner child, believes that if I'm able to control him, I will be safe with him. No, this is the wound that comes up.
Yes.
We need to be with someone who's able to look at us in the eye and speak his truth and say, this works for me. This is my boundary. This is a yes for me. And this is a no for me. Because also Gabo Mate says something beautiful. He says, if I can't trust your no, how can I trust your yes? If you can't say no to me, how can I trust the yes you're telling me?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just want to add in something. So the energetics here, the energetics of money is masculine. So we can also swap out man for money. So a lot of the women I work with, we work together because they want to simplify how they operate in business or in their career, and they want to start to leverage their experience and their skills. They don't want to continue to work too much. They want to leverage their skills so they can make more money, have more time to enjoy the money they're making. And one of my groups, I said something along the lines of, your relationship with men is a mirror to your relationship with money. And everybody was like, listen, I don't even want to talk. I don't want to hear this. I don't want to talk about this. Get me out of here right now. But it's a similar thing. Those energetics are very, very similar. So it's essential if we want to, and let's face it, in this world, because it is, framed by capitalism, we need to create the money we need to make in order for us to be able to live well. So we do need to address it. Like we have partnerships with men, we also have partnerships with money, and you will find that they often mirror each other.
I'm glad you're saying that. And I have a very similar thinking around this as well, because I also feel that money has this masculine energy, and also money in the world that we live in, because of the capitalistic values and the structures and everything, helps us to feel more safe in a certain way, because that's the reality of things, that's the truth of it. Money gives us choice. That's how it is, whether we like it or not. And going back again to Deb Dana, she also says another thing that makes us feel safe is knowing that we have choice, right?
Yep.
And money helps us.
Context, choice.
Beautiful. Exactly that. Yes. So in this case, when often we are underfathered as women, what happens is we are raised without this shell of protection that we are meant to have at this time of our lives. And then we become adults and we start projecting this wounding onto the most immediate masculine energy. And sometimes this masculine energy is money.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, this can look like, in some cases, overworking and money never be enough. I never feel safe.
Yep. Why don't you stay? You always leave.
Yes, exactly. Or I'm on the other side of the spectrum where I'm afraid of money and I under earn and I'm afraid to show my work to the world or whatever this looks like. I never asked for the promotion I know I deserve.
Yes.
So there are many women on this side and there are many women on the other side as well. And I agree with you that I think this has to do in some way with the father wound.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Effie, for people who are like, okay, I recognize myself in pretty much everything this podcast has been speaking to, or some of the things, what are some of the ways people can start to be with their somatic experience? So if they are, the beginning of my journey, I was so detached from my body, anything that felt like anything other than what I could immediately control got shoved away very, very quickly, most of the time without me even knowing. And when I started to do my own work, which ultimately led me to my career in coaching, starting to learn to be present with my felt sense on my own is what led me to start to do therapeutic work with a professional, because what my experience was, I saw that I just couldn't do it. So in trying to do it, I realized I just couldn't do it because I hadn't had that role modeled at all anywhere in my life. And that's what led me to. So it's almost like, how can we begin the titration process on our own that will lead us to, like, there are some things we just need to have the professional support for. So what can people start to do to kind of open them up to the support they need?
Thank you for sharing this and your own experience, because I would say it's very important for people to realize there's nothing wrong with them if they have a hard time connecting with their body in the beginning. We live in a disembodied culture. We are conditioned to be in our head. So if you feel like, okay, you're asking me, what do I feel in my body? I can't feel anything in my body. It's a very common thing. It's not that you don't feel anything in your body. If you're alive, you feel something in your body. It's just your mind is not trained yet to spot sensations in the body. That's what is happening. We could say it's as simple as that. Now, what you can start doing is, I think the key thing first is to start with very, very small expectations, first of all, and to realize that this is a journey, and to start engaging through your 5 senses with the world around you and with your body. So through the sense of hearing, the sense of taste, the sense of touch, sight, anything, start engaging with the world around you. Start engaging with what makes you feel at this point safe. One question that we ask in polyvagal is, what does safety look like for me right now? The reason we ask this question is because when we're dysregulated, and especially for a long time, we don't go straight into calmness. That's a big jump, which is not sustainable for the body. It's not going to feel safe for the body. So we start small. What does safety look like for me right now at this moment, not overall for my whole life? When we ask this question, we can start opening up possibilities to what at this moment can help me experience a subtle shift. We're looking for the subtle shift. That's what I want you to remember for now. How can I co-create with my body and the world around me a subtle shift? Yeah. And we co-create with our body, and we also through co-regulation with the world around us, and through another human being, through our baby, a pet, a candle, a pillow, the sky, the sun. It can be
your window.
Absolutely. And you pay attention as you co-regulate with that thing or that person or your pet. How is your body's experience changing? If it changes, is there any difference in your breath? Is there any difference in your mood? Is there any difference in the level of your tension in your shoulders, your neck, your energy levels? Is there any difference in sensations, if you can spot any sensations in your body? So it's not only sensations. Sensations could be a starting point for some people, but for some people, sensations in the body can be triggering, might not be accessible yet. As I said, there's nothing wrong with you if that's the case. It's just the type of our culture that does not support embodiment. So in this case, if the sensation is not accessible to you, you have other things you could track, like your breath, your heart rate, your energy, your tension levels, your mood. You can even track your thoughts and see if you had racing thoughts before and now maybe you've realized that they've toned down. But also another thing that we do in somatic experiencing, and I think it's brilliant, is you can even notice any images that come up in your consciousness. Sometimes when it's unsafe for us yet to feel our body or experience emotions, images come up. And some people are wonderful with images to see things in their mind's eye. And an image that can be anything from seeing a random colorful umbrella to imagining a beautiful full moon, to seeing yourself running towards the love of your life or whatever that is. It can be anything. This is your gateway to feeling something. So an image is the closest thing to an emotion if we're not able yet to feel an emotion.
Yum. And I would just like to shamelessly plug my book, Women Who Work Too Much, because there is an entire chapter called Be Your Nervous System's Best Friend. And that chapter is informed by me doing Deb Dana's Polyvagal Informed Practice course. And in there, I have got a practice pause, which is called the Pi Body Scan. And it is about our skills of neuroception. And I shared that because when I first began to do my work, it was doing a body scan. It was just something I found on YouTube that alerted me to the fact that I couldn't handle the sensations inside my body. And that led me down my path. And in there, Deb Dana, in her work, she shares a process which she calls a profile map, where you get to understand the different parts of your autonomic ladder. So you start to understand who you are, how you are when you are in a state of fight, flight, freeze, dorsal shutdown, and all of that. So I would actively encourage you, if you haven't bought my book already, to buy the book. And I would even encourage you to get it on audiobook, because the body scans, guided meditations, etc. are there. You're going to hear my voice. I'm going to guide you through it. So my recommendation is to get the book and the audiobook. But Effie, I just feel like time has raced. There's so much more we could talk about, and there are so many places we could go, but it is a podcast. So I am going to move us towards our close and ask you the 3 questions I ask all guests on this podcast. First one is, what is one actionable, and you might have touched on it already, what is one actionable step our listeners can take today towards their own personal liberation and well-being?
I would say develop self-attunement. What we missed out on in childhood, many of us, again, because of our culture, is this attunement, this deeper connection with our parents, where our parents had the capacity to see us, to feel us, to understand our needs without us having to say anything, because it was not our responsibility to say anything as children. Now, as adults, our invitation is to develop this self-attunement. This means getting to know ourselves on a deeper level, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and physiologically, our body. What a beautiful human being you are. Think about it this way. You're such a beautiful human being. How wonderful would it be for someone to know you that deeply? And how wonderful would that be if that someone is you?
Oh,
First
Effie,
of all,
that feels like a huge exhale.
that's what I would say. And I don't want to overcomplicate this. Self-attunement.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. And you know what I am going to say? Get my book, because it's going to help you with that. Okay, next one. How can people contribute to the collective liberation and empowerment of their communities?
Awareness, I would say. It starts with awareness, being awake through your senses. And awake means present. We cannot be awake if we're not present. And to be present, we need to be present to what is happening right now, first within ourselves. That's why this is linked to self-attunement. If I'm not attuned to myself, how can I be adequately and sustainably attuned to the world around me? It's going to wreck me, or I won't have the capacity to do this. So from a place of self-attunement, from a place of enough self-awareness, from a place of enough embodiment, I become aware of what is going on in the world around me. And that's how it can be sustainable, because otherwise it can be so overwhelming. There are so many things that happen all the time that we hear about, and they're so distressing, and they're so heartbreaking. And we need the awareness to be able to make better choices, political choices, buying choices, any kind of choices.
Yeah.
And we need to do this in a sustainable way. So allow yourself to give yourself the offering to become self-attuned to yourself, and then become aware of what is going on in the world around you, in your communities, and take aligned steps towards the liberation and empowerment of all. And I would also say that try as much as possible to become aware through diverse sources of information.
Yes.
Not simply go on CNN and BBC. I mean, if this is your thing, go ahead and do whatever feels right for you. But I would say that media is also mainstream media is also part of systemic trauma.
Yes.
That's how I'm going to call it. And in order for us to create change, we need to receive information from diverse sources. So be mindful of that.
100%, which beautifully leads me to the last question, which is, what are some systemic changes you believe are essential for achieving true liberation and equity for all?
I feel that true liberation and equity for all will happen more from a grassroots level, as opposed to governments will do that.
Yes.
We won't go into why and the what, but that's my feeling. And for that, I would say But we start small. We start within ourselves, from ourselves, and then who we become impacts the generations around us. If you're a mother, if you're a father, if you're planning to, if you have nieces, if you're a teacher, if you have in some way the capacity to influence younger generations through who you are being and the modeling that you're offering, then you influence the people around you and the new generations. And you influence their well-being, because essentially that's what we do. Yeah. You mentioned hyper-independent culture, and hyper-independent culture says, oh, it's just about me, my needs. And if I want to have a need met through someone else, I'm needy. That's not the case. We are mammals. We are meant to thrive in community. And this means that our nervous systems are interconnected. And this means that your well-being is going to influence someone else's well-being. Actually, every person you're crossing paths with. So it's like a pyramid. Yeah. And we want to be mindful of who we are becoming and how we show up in the world and what is our contribution to each person we're crossing paths with. Because the mental health system needs to change. The healthcare system needs to change. Mm-hmm. For this, we need conscious politicians that will be able to do this, to make this happen. I'm not very hopeful that this is going to happen this way. I think generations will start becoming more conscious. People like us, everyday people like us, will become more conscious, more embodied, more aware, and they will start becoming the influencers of the future, the politicians of the future, the thinkers of the future, and that's how change is going to happen.
And that's so powerful, because there was somebody that was saying justice is just us. And if we recognize that justice is just us, we're not going to give away our power. We are going to, rather than having this dominant power over structure, we're going to be sharing power with, we're going to be giving power to those who are the most marginalized and uplifting each other together. What you have shared is so powerful. Thank you so very much. I want to say a huge thank you for you being you in general, and for you being you so authentically and with such candor during this conversation. I think it's been really rich and valuable. For people who would like to connect with you further, see more of what you're about, where's the best place for them to find you, and how can they work with you if they're interested in doing so?
First of all, I want to say as well, thank you for your time. Thank you for the invitation. I felt it was such an enriching conversation, and I appreciate you, and also the thoughtfulness that you've approached the discussion with. Now, with regards to where people can find me is on my website, first of all, www.effiekli.com. Effie is spelled E-F-F-I-E, and my surname is K-L-I. And also you can find me on Instagram. This is where I'm most active these days. Yeah, if you type the trauma educator, it will come up. And if you would like to work with me in a group setting, I have my signature program, which is Healing Trauma Guided by the Body. The next round will begin at some point in September. And also have a workshop coming up on the somatics and energetics of anxiety and depression. You can find the links on Instagram. And of course, if you would like to say hi in my DMs, feel free to do that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for such a rich conversation.
I appreciate you. Thank you as well.
Thank you for joining me on the Liberated Woman Podcast. Your time and attention is valued. I hope you found today's conversation insightful, inspiring, and even galvanizing. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, rate, review, subscribe, comment, and share. Like many things in our digital experience, the algorithm rules, so your interaction is vital. Your support helps me reach more listeners and attract impactful guests. Tune in for more empowering discussions and practical tips to help you live life on your own terms. Until next time, I'm Tamu Thomas, reminding you to embrace your joy. Podcast produced by me, Tamu Thomas, edited by Biongolia, podcast music by James Anderson.